Hello, and welcome to my spotlight on Pacific Northwest composer Morten Lauridsen. When I was first anticipating doing a program on a composer, I thought, how can I make this of interest to both pianists and singers in our local association? What can I bring to the table to make it more personal? It wasn't long before I realized that Morten Lauridsen was the answer. His works are pianistic and vocal and choral and symphonic and poetic and elegant and exquisite and spiritual and ethereal and sublime and breathtakingly beautiful. He is one of the most significant American composers of our time, and he's local. His music is known and loved and revered and performed all over the world, and he lives right here in Washington State on San Juan Island. I've really been enjoying learning about this man and what inspires his compositions, and I feel I could easily spend hours talking with him. He would have been one of those professors I could really connect with on many levels. I've learned that he is deeply spiritual, and he draws inspiration from the sheer beauty of nature and art and poetry and scripture. And then he is able to harness that and create these incredible compositions that touch the listener on a profound level. Morten Johannes Lauridsen III was born on February 27, 1943 in Colfax, Washington. This is the same small town in which our dear friend Keith Kruger was born about 5.5 years later. Lauridsen's childhood was wrought with emotional struggle as his father was abusive. So he and his younger brother spent many summers with their aunt and uncle on an island in the San Juan archipelago, Waldron Island, where he found solace and peace. Raised in Portland, Oregon, Morten Lauridsen attended Sunset High School in nearby Beaverton, Oregon. He then spent 2 years at Whitman College in Walla Walla. He admittedly doesn't really know why, but he didn't anticipate going into music as a profession at first. So in his freshman year at Whitman, he put all of his focus into English and history. During the summer between his freshman and sophomore years at Whitman, he worked for the Forestry Service as a firefighter and found himself for 10 weeks isolated at a remote lookout tower just south of Mount St. Helens. He says, "It was a life-changing experience. 10 weeks alone. When I think of that lookout, and I picture myself on that lookout, the image that comes to mind most vividly is when I was above the clouds," which was a lot of the time. And imagine this, you're above the clouds, the sun is beating down, and it's just you and all these magnificent mountaintops. Rainier, Hood, Jefferson, Adams, St. Helens. And it was a real emotional experience for me. Beauty beyond description. To be above the clouds with these magnificent snowy peaks. During those many hours of solitude in the wilderness, he was able to meditate and reflect about his life, and he came to the conclusion that music had to be in his life. He said, "The major thing that I realized that summer is that I missed music so much." So he poured himself into all the music classes during his sophomore year at Whitman, and then he decided to go to the University of Southern California to further his music education. He studied composition with Ingolf Dahl, Halsey Stevens, Robert Lynn, and Harold Owen. During this time, he developed his interest in music history and conducting. They encouraged him to stay on for graduate work and gave him a wonderful assistantship. While he was there, they asked him to do some teaching. Now, you may think that they asked him to teach composition, but it was actually music theory. They asked him to set up the prep school, their pre-college theory program, which he did, and they also asked him to teach theory to the master classes of world-renowned violinist Jascha Heifetz. That proved to be very successful, and when he graduated with his master's degree, they asked him to stay on and teach theory at the college level. He began teaching at USC Thornton School of Music in 1967 and remained on their faculty until his retirement in 2017. 50 years of teaching. Some of us know Cinda Redman, a wonderful pianist and teacher from the Clark County chapter of WSMTA. For many years, she was the raffle chair at our state conferences. Well, she and her former husband, Michael Redman, of Lawrence Welk fame, know Morten Lauridsen very well. In fact, Cinda calls him by his nickname, Skip. She wrote to me, "Glad you like Skip's works. Did you know we've been dear friends since 1965? He was Michael's friend from high school, roommates at USC, and best man at our wedding. I always loved this picture because Skip carried the box with my ring. He was so scared he'd lose it. I played a wonderful song cycle for his bachelor's Your Boys Should Do, called Backyard Universe. I think you'd really like it. Girl, 3, and boy. My name is in the published music of Pure Music. Then a trumpet sonata for his master's and his piano sonata for his doctorate. So I premiered all these works, and humorously my name is associated many times on the programs." This was at his home in Hollywood, down the street from the Hollywood sign, but he sold it a few years ago. It was a duplicate of Humphrey Bogart's home up the street. On my last visit to him, my favorite new item he had was 3 framed doodles of Gershwin's. Apparently, when George Gershwin was on the phone, he would doodle, and after he died, Ira had them framed. Skip bought 3 of them. I drooled. I have a collection of quite a bit of his pieces back to college love songs under Skip Lauridsen. I think of notes by Mozart and others on changes they'd make. We have them still in history. This is a photo of Skip's changes for my original printing of Lux Aeterna. I've always felt he will still be known 200 years from now. My story on his writing Les Chansons de Rose, where the super popular Dirait-on comes from, I was accompanying the Portland Symphonic Choir in 94-95. The director told me Skip was going to write them a piece. When I saw Skip that Christmas trip south, I mentioned that to him, and his eyes lit up and he said, "Oh, that's right!" So he searched one of his favorite French poems by Rainer Maria Rilke. This is what Skip wrote inside my copy of the Dirait-on that he gave me. I will tell you, thinking back to college years during all our get-togethers and years following, a lot of noise and laughter was always happening. But you could look over at Skip and see many times he was not with us. You could see him deeply thinking about something. Now I truly understand where he was, and we're all the receivers of that genius. The music of Morten Lauridsen occupies a permanent place in the standard vocal repertoire of the 21st century. His 8 vocal cycles, Lux Aeterna, Les Chansons de Rose, Madrigali, 6 fire songs on Italian Renaissance poems, A Winter Come, Quattro Canciones, A Backyard Universe, Nocturnes, and midwinter songs on poems by Robert Graves, instrumental works, art songs, and a series of motets, including O Magnum Mysterium, are performed throughout the world and have been recorded on over 200 CDs, including several that have received Grammy nominations. Mr. Lauridsen served as composer-in-residence of the Los Angeles Master Chorale from 1995 to 2001, and was Distinguished Professor of Composition Emeritus at the University of Southern California, Thornton School of Music, where he chaired the Department of Composition for many years and founded the Advanced Studies program in film scoring. In addition, he is honorary artistic president of Interculture World Choir Games. He has held residencies at over 100 universities and is the recipient of 5 honorary doctorates and the 2016 ASCAP Foundation Life in Music Award. A prize-winning documentary by Michael Stillwater, Shining Night, a portrait of composer Morten Lauridsen, was released in 2012. The very first words you see on the screen in the documentary are that Morten Lauridsen is the most frequently performed American choral composer. I cannot recommend this documentary enough. Sean and I rented it and loved it so much we bought it. It is beautifully written and directed and is accompanied by wonderful sound clips of his works, as well as breathtaking photography and video by Michael Stillwater. In 1975, Morten Lauridsen bought an old dilapidated general store on Waldron Island where he spent many summers in his youth. The general store was called Crumb's Castle, named after the original owners. There's no electricity, no water, and before cell phones, no phone service on Waldron Island. Lauridsen collects rain during the winter and has a 1,300-gallon tank of water. He pumps water into the building every time he goes in the front door. He kept only the sturdiest part of the structure and re-roofed it, put a new foundation under it, new floors, and new drywall. He removed the counters and then took his chainsaw and cut out large windows in order to look out over the water. He says, "When I moved into this place, I had barged across a spinet piano. I paid $50 for it. I got a little bitty barge out there and I had a Volkswagen van and I brought it in the back. We were very low in the water and the captain of the barge said, 'How come we're so low? What you got in there, a piano?' Of course, when we hit the beach, I popped open the back of my Volkswagen van and there was a piano in there. So I moved in there with a $50 piano and a golden retriever and some hand tools and a sleeping bag. And on that $50 piano, I finished. On that very piano, I finished O Magnum Mysterium." The sacred music, I've said, are on time-tested texts that have been around for centuries and centuries and centuries. And I think that they have a universal appeal. I don't think that one has to be a church-going person to relate to these texts. I mean, look, we talk about light. We talk about goodness, you see. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth." The title of one of Lauridsen's best-loved compositions, O Magnum Mysterium, translates as O Great Mystery. Lauridsen says, "O great mystery, and what wondrous sacrament that animals should see the newborn Lord lying in the manger. Oh, great mystery. Life's a mystery. No matter what kind of beliefs one has, it's not a bad idea to follow the 10 Commandments, you see, and to have something in you that looks around you, and you especially feel it here. There's something a little bit bigger than all of us out there. And how do we tap into that? And so you go down deep, and this island provides me that opportunity, especially to get there. I'm right on the water. I'm looking west. I'm looking towards Canada on Cowlitz Bay. This is the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my whole life. You can look out across this expanse over to Canada. You don't see anybody. It's completely silent except for a boat way off in the distance, and the sea, and bird life here and there. Completely silent. This is the way it was in primeval times here. This is what I love about this place. It's hardly changed at all. The homes are quietly set back in the woods, you see, and people don't have generators. They use candles. Dana Gioia, poet and chairman from 2003 to 2009 of the National Endowment for the Arts, said, "When I was younger, I wanted to be a composer, and I have listened to contemporary music my entire life." Morten Lauridsen seems to me one of the few living composers who I would call great. He is one of the few composers who I have conviction will be performed 100, 200 years from now. His music has a kind of authority as well as a beauty. He seems to recapitulate the entire history of Western choral music in his compositions, which still seem fresh and contemporary. He is, I think there's no other word for it, a genius. Nick Strimple, musicologist, says of Lauridsen that he's the only American composer in history who can be called a mystic, whose probing, serene work contains an elusive and indefinable ingredient which leaves the impression that all the questions have been answered. I composed Lux Aeterna, a work based on texts about eternal light, when I got the news that my mother was dying. As so many people in the arts especially do, we turn to art in some shape or form to comfort us and give us strength in these life-changing situations. And as a composer who's spent a lifetime setting words to music, often by the great poets such as Rilke and Robert Graves, and people like that, on universal themes, I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to return to my religious roots as a young boy growing up in Portland, Oregon, to go to those time-tested words from the scriptures. And I chose the theme of light, illumination, understanding. The idea of illumination, the idea of light to give me strength to cope with this situation. And it was a great comfort to me in the 2 years it took me to write the Lux Aeterna, to go to those texts each day on this theme of light. One of my personal favorite things in all the world is sunlight on water. Whenever Sean and I go on vacation, we try to go at least in part where we can be near the water to refresh our souls. There's just something so healing about it. The slight movement of the water with the light dancing on top, and the quiet beauty of nature surrounding it. In this way, I feel some kind of kindred spiritual connection to Morten Lauridsen and his music. Earlier this month, we went to Victoria, BC for our anniversary weekend, and one of the activities was a whale watching trip. Our boat traveled from Victoria almost to Orcas Island and back, passing Waldron Island along the way. I thought about what a paradise Washington State is, and particularly the San Juan Archipelago. When our daughter Laura attended college at Pacific Lutheran University, she was offered the incredible opportunity to travel to New York City in April of 2011 with members of the University Chorale conducted by Dr. Brian Galante. The performance was originally slated to take place at Carnegie Hall, but there was some sort of renovation or repairs taking place at the time, and ultimately the venue was moved to Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center. We traveled with my mom and attended the performance. They performed Lauridsen's Lux Aeterna. It was absolutely exquisite, a memory that will last a lifetime for all of us, with a glorious soundtrack. Lauridsen says, "To compose this while dealing with my mother's impending death, and later on, her death. She died in the middle of this piece, so she never heard it. Although I hear from people all the time that she probably hears it all the time. I simply tried to write something very, very beautiful. A meditation. A quiet meditation about illumination. And people connect with that. It makes no difference where it is, who it is. People are able to hear this music and very often go into a transformative state that connects with something very deep inside of them. And I wrote it for the Los Angeles Master Chorale under the baton of the great Paul Solomunovich, who was one of the world's experts on chant. Paul said, "I was very excited by what I heard, but everything that I did, I heard from the composer at the piano. He played it beautifully the way he would want it, and I took all kinds of notes. I just listened to him passionately play his music and sing it. So it's the composer's interpretation. You could feel the accelerandos to important parts, and then backing off to let it sustain a little longer, and then continuing. And as he played, and he would sort of half sing it, I could see exactly what he wanted, and I would mark my score accordingly. The same way I would mark the score of a Gregorian chant. So you might say that the chant has been the inspiration for the interpretation of this beautiful music. This music is going to live for centuries. It has made me famous all over the world because I'm hanging on to the coattail of the composer. Prayer is the lifting of the mind and heart to God, and I feel that this music of Lauridsen is the perfect prayer for this music, and whenever I do it, I think of that vividly. And it's my way of communicating not to just people, but to my God. Dana Gioia describes Lauridsen's music as sublime, which he defines as a special mode of artistic expression that offers one the perception of beauty, of form, of existence, at the highest, most dizzying possible levels. Lauridsen's best music evokes the sense of operating at the highest levels of creativity, and thus brings the listener to the very limits of awareness. It is an experience that leaves the listener breathless, with the discernment of beauty far beyond everyday life. Morten Lauridsen says, "Sure on this shining night," a very pantheistic poem, feeling at one with nature and the wondrous awe that one has in being within nature, and certainly on a shining night. I experience those on my island so often on Waldron Island, and you feel at one with nature and the world. There is a companion book of photography, a companion to the documentary entitled Morten Lauridsen's Waldron Island Reflections by Michael Stillwater. It is a gift book of photographs and text from the film. I have just ordered it and I'm excited for it to arrive. Morten Lauridsen's website describes it as, "For anyone who appreciates nature as inspiration for creativity, Waldron Island Reflections provides a glimpse into the wild beauty of the Pacific Northwest, where timeless words are given a musical voice through Lauridsen's sublime artistry, and where the only sound you will hear is a piano, along with eagles and seagulls." In 2006, Lauridsen was named an American Choral Master by the National Endowment for the Arts, and in 2007, he was awarded the National Medal of Arts, the highest artistic award in the United States, by then-President George W. Bush in a White House ceremony, for his composition of radiant choral works, combining musical beauty, power, and spiritual depth that have thrilled audiences worldwide. Morten Lauridsen is married to Amber Kim Lauridsen, who has master's degrees in vocal performance and conducting and a doctorate in sacred music. They live in a hilltop home on San Juan Island. Morten has 3 grown sons from his second marriage. All 3 are accomplished pianists and string players. He still owns his Crumbs Castle retreat on Waldron Island, where I believe he will continue to compose as long as he lives. It now houses an 1890 Steinway. There is a second retreat that he built from the ground up that he has filled with artwork and books and musical recordings, where he visits to read and meditate and reflect and just be. He mentions that his taste in listening to music is very eclectic, and then he goes on to list jazz, musical theater, classical, and classic rock. This is another area where I feel a certain kinship to this composer. We enjoy the same kinds of music. I've been privileged to perform and even teach some of his works. I performed O Magnum Mysterium with the Grace Harbor Civic Choir, and I've taught and performed Dirait-on with the Quartet Forecast, and taught a duet version to 2 of my students who sang it at State Solo and Ensemble Competition. Here is a portion of a video where Morten Lauridsen explains how he wrote the very well-known Dirait-on from Les Chansons de Rose. I found his process of composing this folk song fascinating. He takes a major triad, adds a second, and then puts it in first inversion. And that is the basis of the melodic structure. Let's listen in.
Well, I think it'd be helpful to perhaps demonstrate on how a piece is put together by using Dirait-on, because it's become such a well-known piece. It was designed as a piece that had never been composed, always been there. I designed this piece in the style of a French folk song, and for that I wanted to use a chord that was very French, and I went to the music of Ravel and Debussy for a single sonority from which to gather my materials for a melody and for the harmony and for the overall piece. And this is a chord that's very much a favorite of theirs. I chose Ravel and Debussy because we're talking about early 20th century French music, and this is when this French poem was written in 1924. This particular chord, which is simply a major triad with an added second, went on to provide all the material I needed for the composition of Dirait-on. I decided that the piece would be accompanied by something that would sound like a guitar. And so I took that chord and made it into this kind of passage for a guitar. It's the same chord, just changed a little bit in inversion. Something else is in the bass. And then I went ahead and derived the melody from those 4 notes from this chord. Here's the melody. It has to be simple, because one of the characteristics of any folk song is its simplicity. It must be easily sung. It must be able to pass down from generation to generation, vocally, and catchy as well. Now I repeat it, but make it fresh with a new harmony. And change that last note around a little bit. Here it comes last time. Now it's time for a fresh note in melody writing. And then I took the idea of Dirait-on, so they say, as a little repeated refrain. Then I do it again, except to make it more interesting, I offset it by one beat. That's my song. It is easily memorable. It's got two parts. And through the composition process, each one of those two parts is treated in canon, in imitation with itself. So someone goes, ya-dum-dum, and someone else goes, ya-dum. Later on, di-da-di-da-dum, di-da-di-da-dum. And while that's going on, a tenor will be singing a counter melody, a separate melody, but made out of that same material. He goes, and later on in the piece where the choir sings, Dirait-on, Dirait-on, the piano says, I know, I'm going to play the first theme along with that. The melody, the harmony, all come from this chord. Then it's treated with what I hope is sort of elegant understatement. And yet it retains its simplicity and charm as a simple little song. I get emails from people saying, I love this song. How do I get it out of my mind? And I write them back and I said, there's no cure. It was designed to go into your mind and never leave.
In June of 2006, the WSMTA State Conference was held in Ocean Shores, and our chapter hosted the event. The vocal quartet that I directed and sang in, Forecast, performed a full concert at the event. One of the selections we performed was Dirait-on. It's hard to believe this was 16 years ago. This video doesn't show her, but Mary Jo Zimmer is our pianist. From left to right are Keith Kruger, Ted Spoon, Patty Lemon, and me.
Qui s'en sait
Thank you for this opportunity to share with you this brilliant and remarkable composer, Morten Lauridsen.